We're going on. All right. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We are going to get started with our webinar. Super excited for our 5th Coach Development webinar. If you don't know me, my name is Ryan Adams. I'm the Coach Development Manager here with Volleyball BC. And before we get started, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. So I'm currently in Langley Township, which is situated on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples. And in particular, I want to acknowledge our relationship with the Kwantlen, the Katsi, the Matsqui, and the Semiahmoo First Nations. Just a quick overview of the webinar for tonight. So our goal, our focus is kind of help you as coaches and our managers to prepare as you kind of head into sort of an exciting time of provincials, but also a time that kind of raises a lot of emotions. And just to give you some tools and maybe some ahead of time, but during to help you be successful, help your team have a successful provincials tournament, as well as maybe a little bit towards parents and how to support them or how they can support you during that time. This is being recorded, just so you know. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce our 2 sort of presenters or our helpers for tonight. So Dr. Shauna Taylor, many of you have maybe been on some of the other webinars we've already done, but Dr. Taylor has been really involved over the last 20 years supporting high performance athletes from all backgrounds and just trying to find an approach to like a person first and a performer second. And she is the past chair of the Canadian Sports Psychology Association, and her goal is to enhance mental performance and health as part of a holistic development system. So excited to have Dr. Shauna Taylor again. And then one of our mental health ambassadors, many of you have seen or know, is Shanice Marcel. Shanice is currently in Toronto, staying up late for us. So big shout out to Shanice. But if you've been in volleyball BC for a while, you probably recognize Shanice, her name at least. But Shanice, I got to see her when she was pretty young, growing up through the Team BC system, and now just retired recently, but really involved with our Team BC, UBC, with our youth national team, senior national teams, both indoor and beach. So lots of experience as far as performance goes, and lots of experience as far as different coaches, different scenarios in regards to like success and the pressures of those situations. So we're super excited to have both of these lovely ladies to help us guide us through our evening. And without further ado, I'd love to pass it over to Dr. Taylor.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the intro. And you already, mentioned lots about my background and some of the things that are important to me. Of course, sports psychology. We have a really robust association across Canada with the Canadian Sports Psych Association, but I'm also really proud to be a faculty at UBC, where I teach in a high performance coaching and technical leadership program. And we have had so many amazing coaches come through that program, many volleyball coaches in particular, actually. So it's been a real thrill. The courses that I teach there are to do with group dynamics, actually, is one of the courses, and the other one is on leadership and psychology of performance. So been a real thrill being a partner with Volleyball BC over the last several years, but in particular this last year, really trying to roll out our mental health initiative, and just so thrilled to have Shanice and her colleagues Kyla and Derek, who won't be joining us. She's the sole rep tonight, 3 hours ahead of time. So we're going to front load. The questions for her will be more interactive in the beginning. So if we just see her just trickle away, we know why, because it's getting pretty late. It's late in her time zone in Ontario, but so thrilled that she has joined us. And I, unlike you, I am actually joining you because I have the privilege of living and working, playing, training on the unceded traditional territory of the Syilx Nation in the Okanagan Valley. And my pronouns are she and her. So for tonight, when I first started brainstorming with Emma and Ryan about what we were going to look at tonight, I thought, let's go over some of the leadership practices that coaches and managers can lean into as they're heading into this busy, exciting, but sometimes really stressful time of the year. But also, what are some of those leadership practices and the skills that then they can transfer through to the athletes? And so below that on this screen here, you can see some of the other sort of themes that I'm hoping will come through as we move through the night. And just as a little bit of a discussion point, if you have any questions or you want clarification on anything at any time, don't hesitate to put it in the chat box. And I'll try to check that periodically. I've got it set up so that I can see the little indicators if somebody's noted something in the chat, a question or a comment. So don't hesitate to do that. And I can make sure to elaborate a little bit more to make sure I'm a fast talker, even faster. I don't know, Shanice, you're not too fast of a talker. I know I'm a really fast talker, so I have to slow down. But if I'm going through something too quickly, don't hesitate to ask me about it. As a little bit of review, I know I've brought this up before, and if you've watched some of the other webinars that I have collaborated with Volleyball BC on, you'll see that I try to shift the language. Some of the language is really powerful. When we're using words, they have meanings. Some of them have some implicit meaning that isn't always conducive to getting players to open up, for example. And I used to use mental toughness a lot. And, it's not that I don't use it now, but I do try to spin it in a slightly different wording when I'm trying to build mental skills and things like resiliency. I like to use words like flexibility or getting them to be more emotionally agile, especially because the vast majority of you that are listening tonight are likely going to be working with adolescents. And that's when we are developing parts of our brain where we're still exercising, or as I used to say to my teenagers, their brain isn't fully cooked yet. So because it's still in the oven. And so a lot of those emotions are still really volatile. They come and go really quickly. And so getting them to understand the agility of that and to be more flexible versus feeling like they have to be tough all the time. Sometimes you can't be tough. Sometimes you feel vulnerable or you feel like there are a lot of ups and downs. And so if we as adults and leaders start using this kind of language, it opens the door for discussion, gets rid of some of the things like shame or embarrassment where they feel like they can't talk about things like the fears they might be feeling or anxiety or nervousness. These are things that weren't around when I was coming up through the system. And I just feel like we can make a huge difference by changing the language and the way we talk about mental skills. So to start, I thought, let's start with you, the coaches and the managers. Let's start with you and all the things that you're going to do, and a lot of these skills that will and planning, etc., that we'll talk about today is not just directed at you. It's going to have that investment in yourself, and some of these skills is going to have a trickle down effect on your athletes. That's for sure. But also the parents that are looking to you as a leader and as a manager. And it could be that you're wearing multiple hats too. Could be that you're coaches / managers / you're also a parent. So I think it's really amazing that Volleyball BC has this initiative to give back and kind of support coaches and management. And I'm hoping that you're going to see that a lot of these tools and ideas that you're using towards yourself will also pay off in terms of your athlete skill set too. So as we're going through the presentation tonight, just bear in mind that there are those two dimensions through all that we're going to be talking about. And one of the first ones, about a year ago at this time, I did an entire webinar on this topic, on performance anxiety. And some of you may have seen it, but maybe not all of you. And so if you haven't, I encourage you to go back because I go into a lot more detail about performance anxiety, what it is, where it comes from, and different very strategic methods to be able to help manage them on your own as a leader, but also to help transfer that knowledge to your athletes too. So I think it's really important that we understand if we're heading into a high stress period, we need to know what that feels like, be prepared for it, know that it's probably going to have some ebbs and flows, and know that it's actually a really normal, typical response that we're going to have, and that we're going to need a certain level of anxiety to keep us alert and aware and on task. But if it gets too much, it's going to be overwhelming. And so we have to be aware of our own anxiety levels. And that's the coaches and leaders, right? And the parents too. So what does that feel like? And there are tools in the toolkit, the mental health toolkit. Ryan, have you talked about the mental health toolkit at all in some of your sessions?
Well, we haven't necessarily talked about it, but it's in our VBC Coach Development Hub, which I'll share the link and everything. But it's on every newsletter I send out. It has a link to the toolkit, yeah, or to the hub,
Awesome.
which has the toolkit, yeah.
Nice, because I just wanted to make sure, like, if I'm referencing that stuff, like it's in the toolkit that they know that they can get to it, or
Yeah.
that you're going to give them a link to it. Okay, awesome. So this, if you haven't seen it before, this is an example of a check-in tool, and we encourage, so not just athletes, we encourage coaches, referees, parents to be just a little bit more aware of their barometer of how they're feeling that day. Because the reality is, you are the head of the dragon, right? You are the keeper of the culture of your team. And sometimes that includes that barometric pressure. So being able to check in with yourself and know, you know what? I'm not at 100% right now. It's been a busy day. I've had a full work day, and now I have to get in front of this crew and coach them and, herd the cats and get things organized. And I might need a little bit of a mental reset and a break myself. I'm in this challenge zone, and this might mean, some lowered energy. Maybe I'm not feeling like I have all of my emotional capacities at my disposal tonight. I might need to take more frequent breaks. I might need a little more hydration. I might lean on my assistant coach a little bit more. So just normalizing the discussion around a check-in with yourself, and what are you going to need in order to get through that if you're in a challenge zone kind of night, right? We're not going to often be in the comfort zone in sport, because part of performance sport is pushing boundaries, right? And rising up and testing ourselves. And so I think most of us spend, and there's a reason why the challenge zone is so wide in this diagram, is that this is where we spend a lot of time in performance sport, right? So I won't get into too much detail on this, but there's more explanation how you can use this tool and how you can check in the toolkit. So I encourage you to look at that. And there's also more information around this, called your emotional weather report. And you being able to name your own emotions, know how you're feeling, and be able to transfer some of those skills onto your athletes too. So instead of you saying, how's everybody feeling tonight? Or everybody during the team stretch, do a little bit of a check-in. How you doing? How's everyone feel? Let's check in for a second. Let's just see how we're doing. And getting them to actually name it and have that dialogue, have that vocabulary, instead of, I'm okay, I'm okay. The mumble that we get from the typical, hey, I had 5 brothers. Okay. I got a lot of, how you doing? I'm fine. So instead of the mumbles of my brother, them actually being able to say how they actually felt. Actually, today was really tough. My girlfriend broke up with me, right? So that's the reason he's looking like a puppy right now, and he's not bringing the energy that he needs, and he's going to need our support tonight. And so as we're heading into a really pivotal time in the year where tensions will be high, emotions will be high, let's name them. And they don't always have to name them to outside to everybody else, but just to know inside, I'm a little bit irritated tonight, or I'm a little bit worried. I don't have what it takes tonight. Sometimes just by them naming it can de-escalate it and normalize the fact that they might be having a few nerves, and maybe they have a buddy on the team that they could share that with, and you could encourage a buddy system where they team up and discuss that a little bit. Or they find where they are, and then they use one of the self-regulation tools that we're going to go over later in the evening tonight to be able to manage that emotion. Because let's face it, you need emotions to play. You need emotions to be human, frankly. But athletes really need emotion. And I don't know, what do you do, Shanice, when you just knew you were in the challenge zone and you weren't even playing yet, like you'd shown up and you just had one of those days? Go back to your 17-year-old self. Okay. What were some of the things that you did to kind of, okay, I need to get this under control? And it could be that, I don't know, you learned this on your own, or maybe you had coaches that modeled it, but what were some of the things that helped you kind of manage all those fun, sometimes interesting emotions that go coursing through us as young people?
Yeah, good question. I think the one thing that's always worked for me through and through to whether I'm like feeling really down or maybe I'm worried or stressed or I'm angry, I think the one thing that has always helped me get out of it really quickly has been to find some level of play really quickly, whether that's like a fun warm-up game that our coaches had us do, or even like before practice starting, just grabbing like a couple of teammates and goofing off with them, finding some um, avenue to just let loose and be creative and have fun allowed for, the rest of training to be a little bit more enjoyable, allowed it to be a little bit more focused rather than just sitting in the whatever emotion I was kind of showing up in. And that's like been true for me as a kid and true for me as an adult, even in like my coaching career, in my day-to-day life. If I can find something that's more of like a playful, creative thing to do, then it just helps me get out of it really quickly.
I love that. Yeah, it's not like it goes away, right? It's not like suddenly, yeah, we go from 19 to 20 and oh, it's all good now. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we got to still have those outlets and figure out what works for us. So for some people it's connecting, some people it's doing something really physical like some quick pepper or something, or teaming up with a couple of teammates that you're closest with and doing, some sharing, goofing around. I love that. So let's give them the vocabulary to figure out what that is, right? Because they're going to need to use that, especially as you head into playoffs and you head into sort of higher stakes, or at least perceived higher stakes time of year. So I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, sorry, and Sean, just
Yeah,
on that, just
yeah.
literally yesterday, I saw like a golf pro who like works with the top golfers in the world, and that was like his one tip was like, you gotta enjoy it, have fun while you're out there, because if you're trying to hit that putt and you're all super serious and super like, you're gonna feel the nerves a lot more, versus if you're like having fun with it, relax, put you in that flow state a little bit easier than just being so like focused in on, not so much focused in, but so like stressed and serious about the situation versus just enjoying the moment. And so it's funny that Shanice said that, because that's literally yesterday sort of a tip I got from a golf pro.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Yeah, and I love sharing between sports too. There's a really great golf series on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it. It's got a second season just came out. What is it called now? I'm gonna forget. Do you know the one I'm talking about, Ryan?
Yeah, I do know the one. I'm going to forget, but yeah, there's a few good ones on Netflix and some other ones. The football one,
Yeah.
the quarterback one's pretty good too.
Yeah, this one they're sort of following a bunch of pros or guys that have sort of um, made it to the PGA, and it gives you the behind the scenes. And so in the second season, I think it was the fifth episode, it's all about the mental game. And it follows two or three of the golfers, and one of them that's fully embraced hiring a sports psychologist and understanding that, oh, maybe somebody has it in the chat box. Let me see if someone, full swing. Thank you, Karen. That's exactly it. It's full swing. Yes. Are you liking it? Did you see it? I wonder
Karen
if
wins,
you watched
Karen
it.
wins the prize. Yeah, no, I haven't seen it, but yeah.
It's really good. So I would recommend, and you know what? You don't even need to be a golf aficionado. Like it's
Mhm.
just kind of cool to see. It's just the backside, the one that we all know because we live in sport, right? It's kind of the real deal. It's like pull the curtain back of what really goes on if you want to try to be one of the best in the world at something, right?
Mhm.
Especially a physical pursuit, but a very mental pursuit. And so the one he just realizes he's got a lot of stuff he has to deal with. He's got a script that he's created for himself. And every time he shows up and his play starts to deteriorate, the script starts going. And the woman that he works with, she just breaks that right down. They get a lot of trust and they figure out exactly some of the things like what Shanice was discussing and you, Ryan, that you've got to have fun. Like you got to be more gentle with yourself. It's actually the opposite of the way that he was coached, which is you've got to be hard on yourself, right?
Mhm.
In fact, you need to build some flexibility, like I was talking about right off the start. So coming up with a different language and a different way to address making errors and how you view your play, process over outcomes. So
Yeah,
full speed, that'll be the homework. Yeah.
totally. And I was going to say, just think, I don't know, maybe you're going to get into this more, but, knowing Shanice played at UBC, you look at the programs, at least in the volleyball side of things, have done so well consistently, UBC, Trinity, Alberta, those coaches, they allow the athletes to perform well. They don't add to that stress and anxiety in those situations. And obviously, if you know Coach Doug Reimer, he has a little Doug dance, but he's doing that during the play, not necessarily when he's talking to the athletes in timeout and stuff. And same with Coach Hofer, Coach Benjo. They remove any extra layers of stress that athletes have. And I don't know if that was Shanice's experience. That was my experience working with Doug a little bit, but yeah, I think that's a big part of why they're so successful.
It's a huge part. Well, it's this slide, right? It's modeling the way. So if we're going to want our athletes to be mentally flexible and we're going to want them to be able to rise up, we have to actually be present and aware and have that same flexible state. So we have to be mindful of our tone. We have to be mindful of our own energy level, how much emotional capacity we have. Do we need to be a little bit more capable of self-regulating, right? Do we need to step away for a second instead of losing it on the team? Do we need to take a breath ourselves and remind ourselves that they're very likely doing the best that they can right now? And so me laying into them is likely not going to help, right? So doing that as often as possible and really encouraging them to follow you by your modeling that kind of behavior. The parents too, I mean, they're the extension of your team. And so all of you will have your own philosophies about when you meet with your parents. You likely have had some preseason talk. Maybe you've got some ongoing communication in like a team snap or something that you use in order to communicate throughout the year. But really encourage them also to think about that tone, think about the language, think about the supportive sidelines. I always call it supportive sidelines because that's really what we're there for. And supportive sidelines does not mean cutting down another team or using, language that's derogatory or any of that kind of behavior. That's not support as far as I'm concerned. So really getting parents to feel like they are part of that extended team and be deliberate about that. Have it in an email, make it part of a team at a team meeting as you head towards that. Make your wishes explicit, model that. These are our expectations. This is who we are as a team. And we expect this of our extended team, which is the parents. They might need a little reminder later in the year. So after, you check in, then be kind of aware of how you're talking to yourself inside as the play progresses, right? And you start feeling that sense of responsibility that all of us do when we're coaching and managing, and try to check yourself for the kind of language. And you can start doing this now while you're still in practice zone and you're doing, inter-team scrimmages and stuff. Try to avoid any of the sort of all or nothing, high stakes type language. Want to really create this idea of challenge mindset, which is essentially another form of growth mindset. And I'll get into that in a second, but focusing on what they have control over, what they can do, the fundamentals. They're not doing it alone. It's not a bunch of individuals out there. It's 6 players at a time, right? With the full extended team on the bench is all part of that extended team. They don't have to do it by themselves. They've really got nothing but experience to gain. No one has to do anything, right? But everybody could potentially perform amazingly to potential if the messages are not so high stakes. And so I call this when you're using challenge language instead of, threat language. Threat language is like, or else, if we don't do this, like they already know. Like when it's match point, like they already know. They don't, it's like, oh, gee, thanks, Captain Obvious. Like that, thank you so much for reminding me that if I screw up this serve, like it's over. Like, oh, boing, really? I've been playing this game for 10 years. I didn't know that. Like, they all know this, right? So it's like instead, the kind of language that they're up for the challenge, that we believe in them. And, it starts with us too, the things that we're thinking inside. I don't know, Shanice, can you think of any of those clutch moments and some core examples? Mine those memories of yours and go back and think, were there times where you really lived that, where you knew your team was behind you? You already have the pressure on yourself, but what was it about those teams where you felt the most supported and successful? What was it about the culture and the language that made you feel supported in those high pressure moments?
Yeah, I guess I'll just mostly speak to my experience at UBC because I think Doug encompassed everything that makes a really wonderful coach, and I think that's obvious based on what he's been able to accomplish time and
Yeah.
time again. Um, and he always has, his little sayings, and we all call them Dougisms, even though a lot of them are just like generalized quotes. But um, oftentimes our pregame, um, discussion would be centered around this idea of trust. Trust yourselves, trust each other. And then during matches, he would remind us, trust yourselves, trust each other. And so it was really easy to fall back to the level of trust that we had built amongst ourselves and amongst each other as a team because he reminded us about it every day or at least every week. And it was something that we felt like we could do rather than, harping on the things that maybe we were doing wrong. He was always trying to point out the positives, always trying to find, a lot of the good in things. And yes, there were standards and expectations, but a lot of it was centered around a more positive framed, we can do this, trust each other, respect yourselves, respect each other, just really, I don't know, concrete words and concrete values to live by that made it easy to perform, especially when things got challenging.
I love that. I love that, like overarching, like especially trust. That word is so powerful. Do you have
Mhm.
something too, Ryan, that I don't know, that you try to lean into?
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, one of the things, I don't coach too many teams anymore, but one of the things just from a like a skill perspective I use a lot, it might actually come from golf, but was this phrase of see, feel, trust, like so like see the right things and then just feel the right feelings that when you move it, you set the ball or you hit the ball, and then just trust yourself to make the to execute on what you know how to do. I think this time of year with provincials coming up, really at this stage, like the athletes aren't going to acquire too many new skills. So it's really about just like seeing the right things, feeling the right things, and then trusting that feeling and trusting, those processes. And that's been really good. And I think, too, just, I would just say, Coach Janelle Rosima from UFE, who was my assistant coach with the UFE Cascade, she gave me a good tip actually, because she knows me personally, and just like how we present ourselves sometimes, like what we look like and what we're thinking isn't always represented, like isn't always coming through. And so for her, to me was just like, she's like, I know you're not angry, but like you have a pretty, like when you're kind of just staring or looking, you look pretty intimidating at times. So just remember to smile with your eyes. And so I think sometimes just like how what we're thinking, we're presenting isn't all, or giving off isn't always the case from the athlete's perspective. So I think, having a little bit of self-reflection or even asking some of your assistant coaches of like, that. And if you know some of those things about yourself, then you can either remind yourself to do it, like, the beginning of a set, for me, it was like smile with my eyes, take a breath, smile with the eyes. And then as coaches too, I like to just kind of have a little fun with, my assistant coaches and, have some things just between us that kind of help us stay released and relaxed. So that would be my sort of encouragement.
I like that. Geez, we're borrowing a lot from golf tonight. That's good.
I think it's that.
That's okay. That's okay. You know what? Like there are lots of elements in so many sports that are very similar, right? And so, well, I mean, this slide isn't particularly golf, but I mean, I use the same kind of language when I am working with golfers. I work with a lot of golfers too. And a lot of golfers before each shot are in what I call threat state, right? So again, go back and watch, if you haven't watched it already, the performance anxiety webinar from last March. But it's where I first introduced this concept of watching your language and watching the environment and the culture that you're building, that you're not building a threat state environment where you've got athletes, coaches, using words like must do well, have to perform at 100%. It's a must win point, must win set, must win, whatever that is. Instead, replacing it with the language, the kind of the vibe, the energy of, you know what, we're prepared. Let's go for it. Let's do best effort, but it's a team sport. You're not doing this all alone, right? Focus on all those little fundamentals that you can control and play in the moment. If you do all those things, sometimes the volleyball gods shine upon you and smile upon you, right? And that's all we can do. So the threat state just enhances more of the stress hormones that aren't helpful, they can sometimes take away from calm and very automatic, smart decision making. You know, that volleyball IQ starts to get a little bit dimmer when we're in the threat state. So really wanting to use the language. You mentioned earlier, Ryan, about fun, you know, and having this environment where like it's supposed to be fun. And how do we bring some of that fun element into, and if you've ever read any of Dean Smith's stuff, there's some great books written about him and by him as well. Basketball. So I'll introduce another sport, basketball here, but reframing this pressure of winning, instead reframing it of this like fun factor. So he was known for, you know, comebacks. He was really known for comebacks, but also in other words, coming from behind. So really never counting his team as being out. So some spectacular coming from behind finishes, but also saying things like, isn't this fun? This is fun, eh? You know, like just, even though like, I'm sure for some people, it's like, is it really though? Is it having this tight of a game, you know, where my heart is like, you know, beating in my throat? Is this actually fun? I don't know. But, you know, he tried to really use that kind of language. Or wouldn't it be great to come back and win this one? Oh, that would be something, right?
Yeah.
Or
So
let's
I'm gonna
go for
say,
it. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, Sean, I was gonna just say, yeah, one of the things actually I would encourage you to have a couple like jokes that you can kind of pull out, because sometimes that's like the best way to just help your team just reset and relax, is to have something that you can say that's funny or kind of go on. And also, and I don't know the exact science or research behind this, but having a little candy, like a little bit of sugar, I know sometimes can help with that. So that's something we did with our Canada Games team, just had a little bit of quick sugar snacks on the bench just to kind of get something going. And on that story, I don't know the idea of fun and the comebacks, but I know this story. I don't think it was against UBC. I think it was against Alberta, but Trinity Western women's team was down 2-0 in the national finals. And the week before, they had watched in a hotel room the movie The Goonies, if you remember that movie. I actually just watched it like recently, which is funny. And so they're down 2-0, and Alicia Perrin, who's one of our mental health ambassadors, no, she's not, but her husband is, Derek, kind of like they're down 2-0. Everybody has their heads hanging. They're, you know, it's national final or 2-0 against a good team. It's hard to come back. And then she just gets everybody together and she goes, Goonies never say die. And then everybody just like laughs and cheers and celebrates. And then they came back and won that national final, won the next 2 sets against Alberta. So I think it's a good example of that idea of just like breaking the ice somehow, the tension. And, you know, maybe your players or captains can do that for you, but sometimes as coaches need to have those, you know, something in the back of our pocket.
Oh yeah, I love that. Did you ever use humor, Shanice, or that kind of thing? Like any comeback stand out for you?
Oh gosh.
Using
I
jokes?
think I'm like a pretty funny person, but like I'm like under the radar, so I don't have any one-liners or
You
jokes
weren't
off
the,
the top of my head.
no, you're not the comedian there that's doing the
Not the outright one. I'm a little more subtle with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, humor is important at the best of times, and I think it's important at the worst of times too. Whether you're like winning by 10 or you're losing by 10, I think it can really help to, again, going back to that idea of like fun or play or creativity. It kind of gets you into that mind space where you're able to create and flow a little bit more freely.
Awesome. Well, and I don't know if anyone, I know a lot of people have already been introduced for many years now, the growth mindset from Carol Dweck. She's the American psychologist. The first was using this more in the education field, but it's really infiltrated sport and performance in a big way. And this is just one slide, but I mean, there's her book called Mindset. There's all kinds of free, really great sort of utilitarian like worksheets and team builders online if you just put in the words growth mindset and sport or exercises. So go ahead, and if that's something that interests you, go for it. There's also a really great journal. It's called the Big Life Journal, and it's made particularly for children. So if you're working with like the younger age groups, like U12, or I don't know what ages our coaches that are on tonight are going to be specializing in, but in those earlier years, really introducing it in language that they can understand and getting them thinking about these 5 different dimensions. So that hard work trumps, you know, innate skill, right? So things like skills can always be improved. that challenges are to be embraced, that effort is amazing and something that we want to encourage. It's essential. It's the path to mastery, right? And getting them to give and receive feedback in a constructive, productive way, and how they manage setbacks. So these 5 dimensions, so key. And the Big Life Journal does a really good job of using growth mindset. And you could also up age or upskill it. Some of the stuff in the Big Life Journal things you can find online for teens and older, even young adults. So there's some really great things. You don't have to create all this stuff yourself. A lot of other people have already pulled this together. So just do a little bit of a search if this is sort of the area that interests you and something that you might want to use leading into playoffs. Having that growth mindset, it's just another way, I guess, of framing that challenge mindset as well. Back to this concept of modeling too, preparing and trying to be calm, or practicing what that might look like. Ryan, you were even mentioning practicing. Like I literally, I have worked with coaches before where I am like their body language coach, okay? Because like they look so menacing and they don't even know it. They have no idea, right? And I'm like, okay, that's it. Tonight you are going back to the hotel room. You're standing in your bathroom. You are looking at yourself in the mirror and you are going to smile and you are going to give some instructions to your setter and you are going to do this and you're going to that. And you are going to practice not being intimidating, or you are going to practice with a slight smile, not an axe murderer smile, but just a, sort of like just a gentle, neutral expression and making eye contact, because they are so intense. It's not that they are, trying to exude bad vibes or anything. They just have a more, it looks like a more intense, neutral expression for them. That's just the way that their face is structured, or it's the kind of energy that they're giving off. So sometimes it takes a little bit of practice. So I love what you said earlier about like check in with your assistant coach, get some feedback, be self-aware about are there some things that maybe I could do to improve that or potentially change that, and work on that myself. And even that, using the concept of eye contact, using the eye contact wisely as also being sort of the soft place to fall. There was a coach that was working in a mentorship group that I met with last week with Emma Gibbons, and actually Derek was on that call as well. We were working on with some specific clubs across the province that are implementing the mental health action plan in their organizations. And one of the coaches said, when I'm working with my team, just working with a girls team, I think it's U15, so if they're ever scared and they're really starting to feel overwhelmed, just look at me. Just look at me. I'll be ready. I'll be ready. Just look at me. And when you look at me, it's all going to be okay. Because she knows she's already rehearsed. She's going to look right back to them. You got this, right? With that, just that gentle, I'm here. And that finding that grounding source, imagine how powerful that is, that you're looking for the eyes of your coach, who believes in you. That's pretty cool. That's pretty amazing. So I love that that's already something that she has identified is helpful for them. So just make sure when they look at you, then it's not a glare, that's where everything falls apart, people. Okay. Is when you look back at your coach and you're like, yeah, don't. Make sure they're looking at the soft place to fall. They're looking at the steady commander, right? They're looking at the person that is flowing back that sense of calm and belief back to them. And then also, at one point I was working with a very talented squad in 2015 when I first moved back to BC, that had been cultivated at UBC Okanagan. And we had sort of some front row and back row. One particular matchup I'll never forget, where the two of them, they had this really great symbiotic relationship where they just, if either of them needed each other, all they had to do was just eye contact. And you just knew that meant she knows I got this. I know she's got this. And then it became infectious. And pairings were happening all over the court, and things were happening between sidelines and on the court. And that's how, that unconditional positive regard and support starts building. Is it can start with just two people, right? So player to player, coach to player. I don't know, do either of you have anything to say about that, or does that sound familiar? You already sort of talked about Doug and how he gave that sort of vibe and that unconditional, that always looking for the positive. So I imagine he had that kind of energy for you, Shanice, as well.
Yeah, I think definitely. I was just gonna say I think it's maybe even more impactful when you can get multiple athletes to do it for one another. And I think
Yeah.
for me in my like first year as a student athlete at UBC, I had seniors who were great at doing that for me to help, bring me into a game if I was struggling, so that by the time when I was in my 5th year, I felt like I could deliver that for our younger players who were maybe a little bit more stressed out or nervous in those big pressure moments. They could look to me, and I was confident enough to be able to reassure them, like, it's going to be okay. And you know what? You take care of what you got to take care of. I'll do a little bit more to help you. And I'm going to like show you with my body language. I'll show you with my eyes. And I think that helped us, have a lot of success for a really long time.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. Not making it restricted to just the two people, making that grow, that it could really be anybody, right? Who needs it at that time. I love that.
Yeah,
Well, and
I was
yeah,
gonna add, just, I know, Ali McKay, who used to play at SFU and with our senior national team, but also now with their beach program. And one thing she shared one time was she's a libero, or was a libero, and her one of her passing partners, with passing obviously can be a challenging, skill at times, especially in pressure situations. And they just would kind of like, one of them messed up, or even just in general, they just kind of look at each other and they'd sing a little jingle that TV or that commercial. It's all good at Applewood. They kind of just sing that to each other. So kind of like help them like connect with somebody, help them relax a little bit. And that seemed to be work really well for her. And obviously she had a great career. So even that idea of just like something that's not taking your mind off the current situation, but connecting at the same time, something that's fun but also connective. I think it could be a cool thing to do.
oh yeah, jingles are perfect. I mean, also because they're easy to remember too, and they're earworms. You
Mhm.
can't get rid of them once you start singing them. Also, I love that. And another idea some coaches like to do. So with some of the national teams that I've been a part of, we will have an expectation exchange. Now, you don't have to. This, with national teams, I'm dealing with a little bit older athletes who are extremely autonomous and sort of independent. So you might not necessarily want to do athlete to athlete, like one at a time. That can take a long time, can be very time consuming, but you could do it in smaller groups, or you could do it sort of the coaches get together and athletes get together and do this exchange. And there's reciprocity there. So athletes also get to say it. If you've created that kind of trust with the coaching staff as well, it gives them an opportunity to say, hey, we really like it when this is what we'd expect. We feel like we perform best when you. So this is your chance to get that information from your athletes. What do they like? What do they respond to? What are some things that I can do to support them and create that more autonomy, supportive environment where they feel like they have a voice and they have the opportunity to engage with you and start creating some of those expectations. And you set the stage of what kind of expectations you want to be talking about. So it could be how you communicate, how you manage sort of wins and losses, what the behavior is like on site, how you leave the dressing room, right? You leave it better than when you found it, right? Even if there was garbage on the floor that it wasn't yours, we're picking it up and we're putting it away. That's the expectations. So going through some of those norms of what you stand for, and then maybe having athletes do it in groups as well, it makes them realize too, it isn't even just about the stuff that we do on the court. It's who we are as a group of young people. Like, we're becoming really cool people as a result of being on this team. We're learning a lot about ourselves. We're becoming this extended family. This is kind of cool. And it's very empowering, and it'll take the pressure off. It's not just about outcomes, right? It's about other expectations of human connection, feeling good at the end of the day, that this was a memory that'll last forever, that I'll want to go back and remember from time to time, right? So an expectations exchange, lots of ways to do it. You can write them down, you can have them purely verbal or do them in a circle, whatever works for you. If you go online, you can see a bunch of different examples, or if anyone ever has any questions, Ryan, you can just vet them to me too. I have some templates that I can even send you some templates that you can send out to the coaches as well. And then sometimes I'll have, this is one example. I went in one of our last webinars that we did on self-care, we discussed this a bit on having athletes understand, and of course you have to do the same thing, what we can control as a team and individuals and what we can't. And so we might want to brainstorm that, or you can spoon feed and give them a list or a worksheet like this one, where they're actually brainstorming the things as we head into the weeks ahead. What are the things that we can control and really embrace and be proud of? And what are the things we're going to gently let go and just adapt as required? And there are these kinds of things, right? So things in our control over here, here's where we're going to focus. You can do this as a big whiteboard exercise. You can bring in a thing of paper. You can have your team leaders run this instead of you. You sit back and watch as your team brainstorms different ideas of things that they're likely to face that are going to be distracting to performance, irritating, things that have really been, I don't know, dismantled their performance in the past, letting some of that stuff go and directing it over towards things you can control. I don't know, Ryan, have you ever done stuff like this? Or are there certain things that you find really can distract and get in the way as you get towards playoffs, that they get a little bit too hyper focused on?
Yeah,
Or
I think anytime you can, well, kind of even going back to your earlier point about sort of some of the expectations and having, I think the athletes have a little bit of, speak into that sense, a little bit of autonomy, just generally speaking, as I'm sure you know, just really enhances learning and performance in general. Like just, and if your athletes have a chance to participate in what they're doing or not doing, it just automatically increases their learning. So that's just a good practice in general, even as simple as like what warm-up game are you going to play, or what music, if they play music for warm-up, what the music is. But I think the more you can kind of just have, what's the word? Just, have these conversations, talk about them, maybe it's a long one, maybe it's a short one, but I think the more you can kind of have them, then, you're not just all of a sudden, they've, not necessarily prepared, but they're primed to be able to maybe navigate through some of these things a bit better. Obviously, depending on the age of the team and the athletes, there's always going to be a little bit of some challenges, but you say, hey, we've talked about this, we discussed this, and they're not sort of caught off guard by it, and you're not caught off guard either. I think that's a really good, if you kind of go further on in your coaching and you have to go through your your performance coaching or whatever, you have to kind of, hey, contingency plans, like, hey, if this happens, what are we going to do as a coaching staff? If our bus late or a player's late or we forget a jersey, the more you can kind of think about those things as a coaching staff. So maybe even doing that with your assistant coaches might be a good preparation for the coaching staff, and then having one for your team that could be pretty helpful too.
yeah, we did. It was interesting when those are all awesome suggestions, especially like just this idea of anything that you can put towards that autonomy, supportive, independent side of things is almost always going to, I think, just help them grow, in so many ways as young people and as athletes. I did this once with the provincial team when I was still working in Ontario, and it was interesting. We did a similar exercise to this, and the coaches, it was combination expectations exchange and sort of what are our biggest distractions? What do we think we really need to be mindful of to let go, or see if we can come up with a new strategy to adapt to them. And we found out actually one was, so the practices leading up, there had been 3 families that we're not sure why, but I remember distinctly it was 3 families. So whenever we had practice times, those families, like the parents, the mom, the dad, or both, always came and sat like right in the bleachers. And for whatever reason, they felt well, we're getting close to, provincials, and I want to make sure my kid performs well. And I've driven all the way here to drop them off. I'm just going to stay and watch practice. And we found out that change in the dynamics and the fact that they were there, those three, and they were, of course, associated with three players. It was really distracting and irritating to the three players, but it was also very distracting and irritating to the rest of the team. And so the coach had to do something about it. So the coach had to address it with those families and just say, listen, I've sort of asked the team what we would like. And we're in our team building phase right now, like preparing for nationals. And this is really important to us, that this team building be holistic, but also that I listen to the voices of the athletes. And this is what we've said, is that, we won't be having parents directly involved in the practice sessions. Love to see you afterwards for sure. And, we're going to have a family meal midway through the week, but we hope you can respect that. And actually there was no bumps, no pushback. I'm sure there was maybe a little bit internally, but end of the day, the way that it was presented in a very productive, respectful way, and listening to the athletes and just drawing boundaries and creating new ways of looking at this holistic autonomy worked really well. So I'm not saying that the parents had any ill will whatsoever. I think they didn't even think about it. They just did it. They just wanted to be there. They wanted to be part of it, right? They had no idea the impact they were having. And it is what it is. So it kind of took care of itself because the coaches had set up the kind of environment where the athletes felt they could say how they really felt, and so that's just one example. Again, also where we want to build those kinds of relationships with our parents, where we understand what is conducive to performance and what could distract or detract from performance, that families can also support as well. Other ideas to build consistency and to build the synergy of challenge and growth mindset, making sure we're really optimizing any pre-performance routines and warm-up. Maybe ask that leadership core what works best. Ryan said, you're telling them also, what music do you want, right? What drills do you want to do? That kind of thing. So pushing off as much as you can to them, and just keep the mantra of, look, it's all about learning. Like, what did we learn, right? What did we learn today? So whenever something doesn't go well or something is, suboptimal performance, what did we learn, right? What are we taking away from today? Even if things got frustrating, even if a drill didn't go to perfection, what did we learn though? When you start framing it like that, it's almost like you can't lose, right? There is no downside because you're learning, you're pulling the learning all the time. And I think that's, Shanice, sort of what you were saying was Doug's philosophy as well, the idea of learning. Was that a theme throughout your career? Like, was it something that you think you took away from multiple programs and multiple coaches, or particularly at UBC?
That's an interesting question. I think the way that I personally have always viewed my sport and viewed the game is as a continual learner. I don't think every athlete necessarily sees sport that way. I think everyone's kind of involved for different reasons. I think with Doug and a lot of like the more, in my eyes, successful coaches, or the ones that were able to get the most out of their players, were the ones that were creating an environment where there was a lot of autonomy, where there was room for creativity, where there was room for, whatever kind of was within the team to grow and build and be more, and for those people to explore what it could be, rather than it being, a fixed way of, we're playing this way for the whole year and I don't really care what any of my athletes have to say because this is my point of view, this is my coaching style, this is how we're going to get it done. I don't think a lot of coaches that act that way are necessarily successful long term, maybe short term. But yeah, I've always viewed sport as a learner. But I think, yeah, if you can find a way to allow your athletes to be creative, to me that just helps that learning grow and build.
For sure. And I think some athletes too, they are, many of them, like we don't always know the biographies that we inherit when we show up on the court that day, and the different athletes that we're going to have to help enhance throughout the season. So we don't know what their family environment was like. We don't know what their teachers were like in the classrooms where they were raised. We don't know if there was a lot of fixed mindset around them, maybe a lot of ego oriented and a lot of sort of external reward seeking behavior. But it is what it is. And when we're creating teams, especially in a really ultimate team sport like volleyball, you're going to get some diversity, but I still firmly believe that you can enhance more of that growth mindset and that thirsty learner. You can start building a learner at any age. It's possible. I mean, it's easier if you can get them earlier, and the younger, the better, but it doesn't mean that you can't even teach that to a young adult. I really feel like it's something that can go off in us at any time and something that we can enhance at any time. And there's learning, I think, the thirsty ongoing learning. And also as humans, nothing gets our attention more than novelty. So just having a teensy bit of novelty. Ryan talked about it earlier when he said, now is not the time to be introducing massive, shifts in play and technical development, right? This is not the time when you're suddenly building things from the ground up. I'm talking about just one piece of like comforting novelty that's going to be tied to this year's provincial experience, right? That's going to enhance it. So it could be something super silly, like a stuffed animal, mascot that starts showing up that you're going to travel with. It could be a theme, that's words or, an image that's going to be thematic, that'll mean something to the team. It could be a special cheer. It could be a snack, some kind of element to the warm-up that you're going to bring, or this is a place where you could give something productive to your parents. They want to do something, they want to get involved, then they can maybe, as long as it's not going to be something that's super distracting, maybe there will be an organized team meal that they can be in charge of at some point, or it's, we're choosing a certain color to go along with the theme. And so that color is going to be demonstrated in clothing or something that the parents could be in charge of. I leave that to all of you to use that imagination, but thinking about novelty, just a little something that's new, especially teenage brains, and especially these days. I mean, attention spans are not what they used to be. So I'm not saying you should have to like throw everything out and start over. I'm just saying adding a little bit of novelty is not such a bad idea. As long as it's not something, super hardcore, like to do with massive technical shifts or tactical shifts, right? I'm talking about the little ones, like I suggested on the previous screen. Other things, so a theme, for example, this is actually an NCAA, a very well-known coach's theme. His theme was play hard, play together, play smart, right? And came up with that for his playoff run, and then defining what that is, right? So the playing hard is effort. So growth mindset, effort over outcomes. The play together is that points are won and lost together. Like we are a team. Nobody's doing this on their own. And the smart is we all know the fundamentals. We all bring the fundamentals, right? So it's the fundamentals of that volleyball IQ that you've all been taught. I believe in you. Let's do it, right? So coming up with that theme as you're heading into provincials, that can be a powerful thing. And maybe the team can have a part in creating that. It's not all on you, the coach or the manager, to do that. Other things like a team ritual, you can start practicing in practice and bring that into the games with you. So one could be, you feel like people are getting a little bit frustrated. Maybe the other team's been on a bit of a point run for a few times. Then maybe during timeouts, as you're in that huddle, you take one deep collective breath and reset, coaches included, right? Everybody breathes in synchronicity in and out. And while someone might say something like, let's reset, and just in and out. And that can be super powerful. It's also physically powerful when you watch that happen. It's almost like watching like choreography of like some kind of dance squad in the NHL or NBA. And what the heck did we just have? The halftime show. NFL halftime show. Yeah, it's like, choreography. It's your chance to be like, cheerleaders, that kind of thing.
So can I
Yeah,
share
go for it.
on that? So I think it fits really well to kind of the idea of novelty and story and kind of keeping things a little bit different. So I've done this a lot over the years with teams, but with our Canada Games team, we didn't actually do this activity until like heading into our semifinals or the quarterfinals. Anyways, the playoffs. So it was like, over 2 years, we didn't introduce it until the last few days of our thing. And we did the activity, which you could all do, is basically just we split the group up into like groups of 3 or 4, the team, and they had to come up with their top 3 movies. So that was kind of a fun exercise for them as a group to decide what they felt were the top 3 movies. And then we put them up on the board, and then we basically narrowed it down to top 3 from all the suggestions. And then we kind of like, then they had to they had to present why they chose their number one. So someone
Oh, nice.
stood up and kind of gave a little bit of a presentation on why they thought there was. So I can't remember the exact movies, but the Hunger Games for our group was the one that kind of came out. And so the reason that we do the movies is because it's the element of story, and all good stories have, like challenges, like, oh, they're not going to win, oh, and then they kind of have to come through adversity. So it fits really well with the provincials or the sort of sport motif. Anyway, so for us, it was the Hunger Games, like I said. So then we started doing the little whistle or the little sign, if you remember from the Hunger Games, the little
Yes.
not gonna, but so then it became something we would do, as whether it was like coaches or players would do it to each other, and it was novel. It kind of like helped us remember, like, hey, like this is going to be an epic story. We're gonna like go through some tough times, but we're gonna come out on top. So it worked really well. So that's an exercise I've always done, but we didn't. This last time I did it was just like literally like the last 3 days of our season, which was new for me, but the novelty of it really worked well for our group.
I love that. It's not quite the same, but I was working with the UBC Okanagan women's softball team a few seasons ago, and I told them a story about a group of performance psychologists and archaeologists that were in Papua New Guinea, and they were watching an Indigenous game, and they noticed that everyone was saying this word over and over and going. It was sort of a type of like soccer-like game with a sort of modified ball, and they kept saying this word ambalakiki and touching, another one of the players if they were getting frustrated or whatever, and then they would go over and touch a tree that was bordering the turf and say this word. And so when I told them the story, what it actually means is I take it from you. And so it was the teammates being very mindful and aware of how the team is feeling, sort of feeling that emotional barometer. And when they feel like, well, somebody could use an ambalakiki, going over, touching their shoulder or whatever, and taking it from them. And so there's this like deep cultural belief that you can actually take the anxiety and take the negative energy from the other person, like your teammate, or you can even take yourself and go put it in the tree. So they just love that story so much. I told it to them like heading into the finals weekend, and the next thing you know, much like your Hunger Games motif, now that's their theme, right? And so what they did was, I don't know if you can see it in this tiny little thumbnail of me. Can you see the far wall? Probably not. It's too
Yeah,
far.
with the picture was the
In
picture
the
back there.
picture, see how it's a tree? Yeah, it's a big tree. And on the tree, it says Mbalakiki. So they had the poster done afterwards, because of course it was a storybook ending. That's why I'm self-promoting it on this webinar. But they ended up winning nationals because they chose this Mbalakiki, and these leaves would come flying onto the field, and they would pull up the leaf and be Mbalakiki, right? And so just having something fun and novel like that became this galvanizing piece. All they needed was the one word, and that word symbolized, like, I take it from you, like it's a team sport. I don't have to do this all by myself, right? We can do this together. And so having that little bit of novelty made a big difference at that time of the year when there was so much pressure and so many other external things cluttering their brain. And speaking of cluttering the brain, you brought up earlier, Ryan, the theme from golf that you took, which was, now what was it again? It was something feel.
I think it was. I don't remember if this is exactly
Feel.
Seafield Trust. Yeah,
You
Seafield
feel
Trust.
trust. I like that. Yeah. So just like 2 or 3 words, sensations, concepts, whatever that is, because our brain can only handle so many commands at once. The reticular activating system is our focusing point, and it really narrows our attention and draws them towards the things that we think are important. So if you've got just those 3 words, those 3 commands, 2 commands, 1 commands, that's pretty much the extent of what we can really retain. And when you're in those huddles, so just be mindful of that when you're giving instruction, especially in the high pressure times. How much can they really retain? What are the simple, feeling-based, tactile, very fundamental words that are going to have the most bang for their buck that I could say right now, instead of a bunch of want, Charlie Brown's teacher talk that they're not going to hear. And in those huddles, there are cognitive biases or ways that our brain is able to retain information and what it will gravitate towards remembering in our stored memory. One's called the primacy rule, and one is called the recency rule. And primacy means that you're going to remember the first thing that you hear. That's going to stand out. But also the recency. So the last thing that you experienced, or the last thing that you saw, or the last thing that you heard, you're going to retain. So it's more likely that they're going to retain the first and or the last in a huddle or a timeout. So remember that, make it count. So whether it's at the front end or the back, just think about the bookends, right? And in the middle, I don't know what you're supposed to do, sing a song or something. I don't know, but they're not going to remember it. So don't bother, just have 2 things. That's it. So they'll retain both of them. But yeah, the overcoaching, that can tend to, I don't know. Do either of you have funny stories about overcoaching, Ryan or Shanice? Did that ever happen in your career? I'm sure we've all had that moment.
I
don't
mean,
know.
if a coach ever speaks too much, I'm probably eyes glazed over. I'm not listening anymore. So
Exactly.
odds are most other athletes are doing something similar.
I know. You know what? A lot of coaches will fess up later when they've had a lot of experience and, they're kind of in a relaxed setting, exchanging ideas with me, and they'll say, I fully admit that half the time it was just me getting my anxiety out talking. Okay. Like, I don't know that I was actually helping in those moments. I wanted so badly, because there is that effect of a former player turned coach. You have this helplessness, right? And the timeouts and those moments to communicate feel like the opportunity for you to offload and have an impact. But the more that we can recognize, if we really want to have an impact, like less is more, that's something we got to work on, right? So I don't know, Ryan, how do you feel about that?
No, yeah, I mean, that's why I'm always just a big component or proponent. Anyways, I'm a big fan of just external pictures. So I'll give you an example. That not one of my own examples, but like Ben Joe used to talk about when he was with the women's national team, actually, just like as a middle blocker, as a blocker, like making sure you turn your hips to get outside to block. And so he would just use like Shakira, like that was the phrase that they would use, because those your hips don't lie. So
Yeah.
like that's an easy picture. You could say Shakira, and right away your athletes get it. And also kind of, again, it's kind of like it's light. It's not necessarily instructive or like, hey, you gotta turn. It's just like, hey, you gotta get a bit more Shakira hips, and they're like, yeah, I get it. So I think the more you can tie in whatever the cues are to a picture that just like summarizes it and gives them like a external picture of what they're supposed to maybe do, versus like a internal whatever or instruction, because again they'll remember Shakira, but if you start talking about, hey, like you're not getting your hips around quick enough or whatever, they're just not going to remember that. So hopefully
No.
you've layered some of those external cue pictures, but if you haven't, it's not too late, especially if you play in one of the later provincials, to kind of put in some pictures of what you want to see from both a system perspective and from maybe some individual skills perspective.
I love that. Yeah. Anything that's going to be like using metaphor, using visuals, using music, right? Using lyrics, all kind like, let's try a bunch of things. And some athletes will respond. It just depends on on the athlete, right? Of what they respond to best too, because some athletes have different learning styles and retention thresholds. So we might have to experiment a bit too. I love that. And just have fun with it. Have fun with it if you can. So yeah, different skills then that athletes can work on and feel a little bit more in charge. Things that likely you've already started to introduce throughout the season, but things we really want to make sure as we're heading into provincials that they're aware of is, if they're getting into that threat state mindset, and we're doing a check-in. How's everybody feeling? How's everybody self-talk now? Okay, how's that internal dialogue going? Is everybody being their own buddy right now? Is everybody being kind? Is everybody feeling like, you got this? So think about having moments in your practices, replicate what it's going to be like in games, do the same thing as you're heading into warm-up, have the athletes also do it so that they have their own autonomy too, and are maybe doing it in a buddy system or sort of senior and younger player, where they're listening to how they're talking to themselves, especially after they make an error, after, maybe the play turns, or people are starting to feel the effects of fatigue, they're getting frustrated, right? What's the language like? So they should have already rehearsed some challenge state phrases that get them calm, make them feel good, help them reset. Could be just even one word, doesn't even have to be a whole sentence. It could just be a few words spliced together. And especially if they can use their name and really use their own name, the way that they've been responding to that name their whole life. What's a lot of the sort of psychomotor learning literature and sports psychology literature shows is you use your name in your own self-talk, it's even more powerful as well. So make sure you're reinforcing that. Doing also heart-focused breathing, where they're breathing to help enhance that emotional platform, increase or decrease intensity level. And sometimes it feels good too to just take your hand, just put it on your chest over your heart if you're needing that moment to recover, and just breathe in and really feel that heart beating. Count in for 5 slowly and then exhale. And you could even do something like this exercise where you're inhaling, I got this, right? And exhaling any kind of doubt, worries, all that going out. So practice that in practice. Get them to try that at home in a calm state when they're away from the court too. So just practicing things like mindfulness and being aware and setting up their own tension level. I have this all this stuff is on a worksheet too. And I was thinking, Ryan, I could send you this. So
Yeah,
just some
that'd be
things to
great.
help them set the tension level. This is something you could do at the end of practice. You need like 10 minutes. That's it. And just getting them to be aware of how powerful their breathing is, especially when they're under fatigue, or if they're finding their thoughts are all over the place. Get them to become more aware of how, if they enhance that breathing, be intentional about it. They might have pre-performance breathing, like before a set, for example, or before a service, or you might have serve receive breathing too, or you might have breathing as you've got the paddle, you're about to head on the court. Maybe you're a substitution, activation breathing. Couple like deep breaths to just kind of get you stoked because you're about to head out on court. Breath is a powerful thing, and that extra blood flow is really important. Having, I discussed this also in our self-care webinar and the one last year on performance anxiety, how important it is to integrate mental rehearsal at any time. So it can start in the dressing room. It can start, frankly, at home when they're on their own too, in their bed at night, when they're getting excited thinking about the weekend ahead and what's coming up, or maybe they're processing what they learned in practice that day and just reinforcing it. Just normalizing that this is a very powerful and important skill that they can be practicing. I don't know if either of you have anything to say about the self-regulation tools of breathing or visualizing. I mean, what do you like to do? Do either of you have certain ways that you like to introduce it, or make sure that your athletes are using these skills? Shanice,
Go
I don't
ahead,
know if you're
Shanice.
still
Yeah, go
awake.
ahead, Shanice.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm still alive. I think it's really individual. Like, I'm someone who I never really practiced visualization, I'd say. It was a tool that didn't work for me, even if, coaches tried to introduce it or we would have like group sessions. It was just something that didn't work for me. I think breathing is a little bit more relatable. But a lot of it requires really deep self-awareness, I'd say. And I'm thinking of like trying to picture myself as a younger athlete. I feel like my attention span to be able to do that is probably not so high. But I do think there is value in, you know, as a coach, creating some sort of a team bubble, like, and it doesn't have to be at this big thing as visualizing or deep breathing together, but having, you know, things be the same, especially leading into provincial championships or national championships, um, where you're moving game to game as a unit. You know, no parents are interrupting that unit. It is just kind of its own little bubble, um, just so you can cut through what the distractions would be, because there are tons at provincials. There are tons of distractions at nationals. And so I think it's a matter of like creating that environment where the athletes can, you know, focus on themselves and focus on each other. And it doesn't have to be anything more than that, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I like that. So you just had to find what worked for you.
Mhm.
And yeah, we might have some of these sort of global team, you know, try these on for size, but ultimately every athlete still has to be given the autonomy to find the things that work best for them. So
Mhm.
having some rituals that are consistent that you can do. I like the concept of the bubble like that. What do you think, Ryan? Have you got any?
Yeah, I think, especially if you're, kind of growing up through it, you have to give athletes the tools, or at least, the language to try the different things. And I think creating that space, whatever that time limit is, working backwards from your match where there's going to be a moment, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but where that bubble is protected. And in that time, you could have either like a team breathing point, or it's more like, hey, like in this 10 minutes, you can choose to, do some breathing, you can choose to do some visualization, you can choose to do a little bit of whatever, like more movement, but we're going to let people do that on their own, unless like you and a partner feel like, for you, you need to be a bit more chatty together or whatever it is. So I think, but creating that, some tools for the athletes. And I think the visualization part is, I would say is big. And I think, the breathing, I could see what Shanice is saying, but I think that box breathing idea where you're just kind of like, using your finger to go, I don't know what the timing is, up 4 or 5 across. That kind of just helps you kind of stay engaged, I think, because you're sort of having a task to focus on as an athlete. So, but I definitely think, yeah, giving your athletes some ideas or tools. And if you haven't practiced it yet, then, doing some of that at your practices leading up to provincials, putting some time aside, and then maybe just going into like right into a scrimmage, an inter squad scrimmage or whatever. Because if you haven't done it yet, you definitely need to have a few times where you're practicing it before provincials.
Yeah, I probably don't want to be throwing a bunch of new self-regulation tools at them right in a semifinal. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm going to pull stuff out of the air though. Yeah. I mean, I've been known to throw stuff right at them, never done this before. Do it now, because nothing else is working. So,
Yeah,
sometimes
that's
I have,
the art of coaching right there. The art of
yeah,
coaching.
you just wing it. So yeah, and then the last one that I had here, and then we can see if there's any questions, or if we want Shanice to just go put her pajamas on. I don't know, but just like this idea too. So some might want to visualize, some might be into breathing, some might be they need to connect. Like their thing is they need to connect, or some they just need a little bit of time on their own. They just need a little bit of time on their own, do something tactile. Everybody's different, but coming up with some kind of, I call it their centering routine. So a way that they can just get in that bubble that Shanice was talking about. You got your team bubble, but then you got your personal bubble too, where you're just getting your game face on, right? Like I am ready for performance. I am getting primed. I am feeling like I'm as close to 10 out of 10 as I'm going to get. And here are the things that I like to do. So getting them to write that down or think through what makes you feel good, what gets you in the energy level right where it needs to be. What do we need to do to support you to do that? And what tools do you need in order to make that happen? So put some of that back on your athletes too. And if they don't know that, that's our job to help them come up with some of those tools and experiment. But yeah, so big, wide menu of different tools, but don't want to do a ton of brand new introduction now and bombard them with that. Now is the time to really instill trust and confidence in the fundamentals that they've been working with all season long that have gotten you to provincials. And I don't know, maybe this time we can see if there's any questions or anything, Ryan, or if we can let Shanice off the hook so she can go and count some sheep. I don't know.
I think it'd be good to do questions. I was just thinking too, so we're lucky, I was lucky to have with the Canada Games, we had a sports like person assigned to us, Carl Newenhouse, who's BC, volleyball guy too. And he gave us or athletes, a good template to use as far as, working backwards from your match time, like what are the things you're going to do, to help you prepare for that match. So was really helpful, and then it could be individualized for each athlete. So you might have like a team thing at a certain point in time, but then other than that, like what do you as an athlete, what's your plan to kind of help you prepare? So I can share that too when we share some of this other stuff with the coaches on the call.
Yeah. That's a great idea. Yeah, just getting them to be a little bit more responsible and just to think tactically, or I call it just disciplined thinking, disciplined planning. And, it's not there when you're 11, 12 years old, but by the time, you're 15, 16, 17, you're starting to realize and spot these patterns. Okay, so 1 hour out, 30 minutes out, 15 minutes out, on court during warm up. Here's some of the things I like integrating. And that's all part of like holistic athlete development. And that includes the mental performance piece, right?
And I think
So
then it's good for parents to know that too, right? So it's not just like the kid saying, "No, you can't talk to me right now, mom," or like
yeah, I
coach
know.
coach is getting
Parents
frustrated.
texting their kids.
So it's just like, hey, like at this time, and then they kind of know, they know that a little bit, and because parents obviously want to be involved and mostly want to help, but it's like at some point in time you just start dialing in for that match.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a natural boundary setting exercise too, which is awesome. And then it's team building at the same time. So nice. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions, any specific challenges they're thinking about, something they'd like, if we brought it up tonight and you'd like more information on. I imagine they can also email you afterwards, Ryan. Like, do you leave the door open that if there's anything that comes up later or
Only for
people
the coaches I
watching?
like. Yeah, not for Mark, not for Mary, not for Lauren. No, I'm joking. Yeah, everybody can email. And, I think pretty much never have my email, but coach@volleyballbc.org. But yes, of course. Yeah, and any questions, yeah, feel free to put them in now. But yeah, my job really is to support you guys. So some of that is just, some basic coaching requirements, which not really like what I'm about, but I'm happy to help individuals or collectives, in any sense. Or if I don't know, I can always, pass them off to you. Or Shanice, just not
Yeah,
to,
we'll send him off to Shanice. We'll
yeah.
just send all the questions to her.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe if we're waiting for one more question, but Shanice, did you have like a memory or a practice or something that worked really well for you to prepare, for pressure situations or matches, what like provincials or nationals, anything that you can pull from, or any sort of memory of a thing your team did sort of to prepare for that?
Good question. I think individually, one thing I've always tried to do is A, dream really big, and B, with those dreams, write them down. So in my 3rd year playing at UBC, I had 2 like fairly decent years the year before, but in my 3rd year at like the start of the season or maybe like midway through the first semester, I started making really clear goals and I started writing them down. And Shauna's heard this before, but I would put them on like Post-it notes or something and I would stick them up on my wall. And a lot of those goals were like, I wanted to win U Sports with UBC. I wanted to be in the top 5 hitting percentage. Whatever it was, like something that felt a little bit out of this world. And then I would put it somewhere so that it was visibly in front of me. And I'd say like 75% of the time in my life when I've done that, those things have come to fruition because I was able to see them quite often. So I would encourage anyone to, like, even as a coach, do that for themselves. What are the things that you want to accomplish as a coach? Write them down, however big or absurd they may seem. I think they're a lot more attainable if you can write them down and have it be like a visible thing in front of you. Um, and then just things with my teams that I've enjoyed. Um, is creating that bubble, but having lots of like routines through that. So like at UBC, I watched UBC play in their national final a few weeks ago. And one of the traditions that we created, the team is still doing now. So it's really cool to see that. But it was nothing like crazy. It was just as soon as the clock hits a certain number, all the teammates are diving on the floor to the center of the gym together. And we're like, in it to win it from that point on. That was kind of our like centering moment to, we know what we're doing for the next 37 minutes of warm up leading up to the game. But it was just really cool to see some of those traditions continue.
Oh, fun. Yeah, that
Yeah.
must feel so cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
seeing the legacy, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Nice. Well, we got a thank you in here from Mark Lafleur. Thanks, Mark. Hope you took something cool from tonight. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look like there's many questions, but again, you can feel free to reach out or follow up with me. I'll try to send an email out it's Monday, yeah, so this week sometime with some the documents, resources, and some of the webinars, like the webinar Shauna was referring to about performance anxiety last year. We'll make sure that's included as well as the mental health toolkit and the link to that. But anytime, feel free to email me and contact me. And big thanks to Shauna and Shanice for joining us and yeah, just helping our coaches hopefully feel a little bit more prepared heading into a very exciting season of provincials coming up.
Awesome. Well, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
especially shout out to Shanice for staying up
Mhm.
past her bedtime. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you. Bye. Good night.